Digital greetings and a warm analog welcome to you. I am the Critical Android. This is the Critical Cast. And joining me for today's episode, he's a German speedrunner who is holding the current world record, and he might correct me on this, in at least 2 games here for Ghosts and Goblins and Castlevania the Adventure. It's Laxxus. How are you, good sir?
Hello, everyone. I'm doing perfectly fine. I hope you're doing good as well.
Yeah, I'm actually looking forward to this for a while here because I've been following your streams for the better part of a year, probably about 7 or 8 months now. I've just been really taken by not only your game choice, because we'll talk about that in a second here, because there's some very interesting games that you play. But before we get into that, one of the things that I've been wanting to do for a while is talk to a speedrunner, because my interest in it is more in terms of watching them participating in speedruns. But what was it that got you into the world of speedrunning, and could you explain for people who might not be familiar with what speedrunning is of video games, a bit about what goes into it and what you find enjoyable about it?
Yeah, sure. What exactly got me into speedrunning? I'm not sure. I believe it was watching a GDQ Games Done Quick event, like all the way back in 2013 or something. I don't know, quite a while back. It's been a while, so I'm not 100% sure about that. That got me interested. I mean, I was always interested in playing video games. That looked like a fun challenge to me. I basically started doing my first speedrun attempts in like somewhere around late 2013 or 2014, somewhere around that. Pretty poor attempts, but it was fun. Speedrunning, I think for me and for a lot of people, it's a lot about challenging yourself, also experiencing games that you like in a very different way. I mean, most people have like certain games they like a lot and they've played through them countless times over and over again. Trying to speedrun this is a very different experience. You suddenly play the game in a different way. That might be easier, might be harder, depends all on the game. But you get a different view of it, and you often learn a lot more about the game that you might not have known from just casually playing it, even if you played it several times.
As an example of that, can you think of a game that you originally played casually growing up and that you've revisited as a speedrunner to really feel like what the difference is between playing it both ways?
Good question. I mean, Castlevania the Adventure, I played as a kid. I speedrun it way later. I'm not sure if that game is a perfect example for that, because speedrun is not that exciting or has that much crazy tech. I want to say that is different from a casual play. A better example maybe would be for me Link's Awakening.
Okay, yeah.
Which I also played as a kid. I still love this game. The only speedrun I did of that was like a glitched any % run that is like 5 minutes long. So it is very different from what you would expect casually. Actually, that speedrun is Link's Awakening DX, so the Game Boy Color version. But that definitely gave me a very different view on the game. One day, hopefully, I might learn a more normal category of the game. Yeah, there's a lot of games have just crazy glitches that let you get right to the end or something like that, or give you insane shortcuts that you would just not find normally or never even consider. That's something that is usually very interesting to me.
Speaking of things that are interesting, one of the really fascinating things to me is how, even though we're united in terms of love of video games, culturally, there are certain things that might be more popular in one region of the world than others, and then with the case of gaming specifically, there are certain games that either didn't come out in Europe versus America versus Japan and things like that. Growing up, what were some of the more popular games that you played? And what were some of the games that didn't get released in Europe that you were kind of on the outside looking in and thinking, man, I wish that came out over here?
Back then, the thing was that without really internet, you didn't realize how many good games we didn't get in Europe. For example, we didn't get Chrono Trigger, we didn't get most of the Final Fantasy games. The first Final Fantasy we got was Final Fantasy VII. you didn't know about it back then. There was barely any internet, so you didn't feel like you left out on anything, right?
What you don't know doesn't hurt you, I guess you could say.
Exactly. Just like when we got Final Fantasy VII, I remember my brother bought the game back then when it came out and was really hyped about it. And then for like 2 years, it didn't work on our PC because the graphic card wasn't compatible. It was kind of sad, but when it finally worked, it was pretty hype. We got the PC version, and as you may know, the PC version has really, really bad sound.
Yes.
It has MIDI sound, but once again, we didn't know it back then, so it wasn't a problem.
I remember hearing one of the MIDI versions of One Winged Angel one time and thinking, this doesn't sound quite right. I don't know what's wrong here.
Back then, we didn't know that Final Fantasy 7 and 8 on the PC had this crappy MIDI sound. It wasn't supposed to sound like that, so it was fine. But when you hear it later, dang, it makes such a difference. It is crazy.
The original Famicom soundtrack to Castlevania 2 is vastly different than the NES one, which is strange because with Castlevania 3, it's the opposite, where the Japanese version, because they have an extra sound channel that was being utilized, the Castlevania 3 soundtrack for the Japanese version sounds amazing. The American one, or I should say the outside of Japan, that version still sounds good, but that extra sound channel makes a huge difference. But then with Castlevania 2, it sounds so awful, and I didn't realize that until I was playing the Castlevania collection that Konami released. And they have on one of the title screens, they have the Japanese version of Bloody Tears, and it sounds really bad.
Yeah, it is weird. I don't know what they did there. Castlevania 3 is really a better example where both soundtracks really sound good, but they're different. Another thing is, obviously, back then in Europe, we had our PAL systems, so 50 instead of 60 FPS. What that also meant was that a lot of games, the music was also slowed down. Once again, we didn't know it back then. But if you listen to a comparison between, for example, Mega Man 2 on PAL and NTSC, it is crazy. Once you know the proper version, the other one sounds so bad. It's pretty insane.
What were some of the more popular games growing up? Like, and what consoles were popular? I know, and I'm guessing it's probably more similar to what was in the US and the UK. But like, I know there's some weird things that happen. Like, for instance, in Brazil, the Sega Master System was way more popular than you would have expected it to be, and you get weird cultural things like that. Can you think of anything, now that you have the internet and you're able to talk with people from other countries and all that stuff, can you think of things that you've come across where like, wow, that wasn't popular over there? It was big here in Germany.
No. I think Europe, or at least like Central Europe, was pretty standard in that regard. Personally, I never had a NES or SNES growing up, just a Game Boy. But I played that over friends' houses, for example. But I think overall, one difference is that in Europe, PC gaming was a lot bigger than in America.
Yep, the Amiga and whatnot took off much bigger over in the UK and Europe than it was over here.
From what I know, the US was mostly console gaming, and Europe had a lot more PC gaming, and that was also for me. So I grew up with a lot of DOS games and all that stuff.
Any particular ones that stand out? It's like those nostalgic DOS games that you loved?
Still, my all-time favorite game is a DOS RPG from 1993, Betrayal at Krondor. Not a lot of people know it. It's a really great game. It's just horrible to get into nowadays because the overworld has like 3D graphics, and well, 1993 3D graphics, they didn't age well.
Oh yeah, what was it for? It was a PC game and then was converted to the SNES. I think it's called Draken, and it has a terrible 3D overworld.
Oh yeah.
Impressive for the time, all things considered, that they were even trying that, but my god, it looks terrible.
Yeah, like a lot of these DOS games, similar to most N64 games, like they just aged so poorly with these 3D graphics. that it's really hard to get into any of these unless you know them from back then.
Speaking of like the N64 era and how things changed and now how things have even changed again, it surprises me, and I'm wondering how you feel about it. Are you ever surprised at how well the games from back in the NES and the SNES era have aged? Because it seems like they've considerably aged better than anything that came out of the start of the 32-bit era and the 64-bit era.
I mean, I'm not really surprised. 2D just ages so much better than 3D can. 2D has just basically it has a limit, right? Whereas you still see 3D getting prettier and prettier to this day. Like the graphics still get better and better. For 2D, there's just a point where it looks really good, and there's not really much you can make that much better. I'm not surprised. That being said, like if you look at some NES games, they are still pretty rough.
Oh gosh, one that comes to mind that I've watched you live stream before and you regretted playing it was the Capcom game of Trojan.
Oh my god, don't remind me of that.
That's a classic example. But another one that I feel, and you'll probably disagree with this because you played this game successfully, but one of the games that you hold a world record on is the NES version of Ghosts and Goblins, which, I've beaten Ninja Gaiden, I've taken on and beaten most of the Castlevania games for the NES, other difficult games. But Ghosts and Goblins, I cannot get through. I have so many complaints about the game, but here you are speedrunning it to the point where you can play that game faster than anybody else. Why, Laxxus? Why did you put yourself through that? And what drew you to the game?
I mean, it's a fun game. I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay, let me ask this. Did you ever play the game casually before speedrunning it, or did you just look at it and be like, okay, so you did. And what were your thoughts playing it casually?
I enjoyed it.
Really?
I played it a few years, I think, before I decided to speedrun the game. I played it casually, and obviously it was a pretty rough game. Like, I mean, the game is really hard. I can't argue with that. But I enjoyed it. It is a very simple game, but very challenging. Like a lot of people already have a lot of problems with jumps being fixed, so you can't switch direction mid-air or whatever. A lot of people complain about that, but if you play a lot of other games like Castlevania, for example, you're just used to it, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I just usually like games that challenge me. There's a line where it isn't fun anymore because it's too hard and frustrating. To a certain degree, I really like games that challenge me, and that game definitely was challenging. I mean, can't argue with that. Sure, its graphics are not the greatest.
Yeah.
I mean, the sound effects, the burrito sound is something special. Other than that, I mean, I enjoy the music overall, and I enjoy the game.
Oh, the stage 1 level theme, that's a classic. That's one of the better compositions on the NES, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I mean, most didn't see the rest of the game, so it just stayed at stage 1 music, right?
I think for most people, you're right. But when you started speedrunning the game, obviously, speedrunners have to know a lot of the ins and outs of the game to understand the mechanics, why things happen the way that they do. When you started to speedrun it, did you discover things about the game that made you look at it in a new light as to how it was, how things were designed, how enemies spawned? What really struck you when you started to learn the game as a speedrunner?
Yeah, definitely. So there was a tutorial for the game, but I think it was only for the first loop. But that helped me to get into some of the mechanics and stuff. But what's interesting about the game is when we do speedruns of that game, every time we start a new run, we start from a console off. So not reset, but turn the console off completely. Power on, and then go. That way, we always start with the same RNG in the beginning for the enemies spawning. Like, people who played the game know that there's a lot of random spawns, like right at the beginning, a lot of zombies spawn in very random patterns. But if you start from a power on, you always get the same patterns. That is used to obviously go faster because you predict the patterns and you can adjust to that. The more I played, the more I realized that you can, if you don't mess up, you can map out the complete 2 loops of the game and have no random spawns at all. I think stuff like that is really interesting because like when you play it casually, it just doesn't happen. Everything just feels random. But finding ways to make stuff that feels random completely reliable and always the same, that's just stuff that I think is pretty exciting. No one would ever find without speedrunning it, pretty much.
So just for clarification for people who may not be familiar with speedrunning, you mentioned the term RNG, which for people who don't know, it stands for random number generation, which is a formula that's used for calculating when certain events or if certain events will take place in a game. Like you mentioned, where an enemy might spawn, things like that. And there are some games where, again, as you mentioned, they could be played start to end identically. If there was no human error involved and you played it perfectly, the playthroughs would match up perfectly. But there are other games, like for example, Goldeneye, I'll toss out there for people who have played it. In the second level of the facility, there is a doctor that spawns named Dr. Doak, and he can spawn in a certain number of locations, and there's really nothing you can do to control where that happens. You just kind of have to hope and pray he's in the certain location that you need in order for the run to go through the way it does. For Ghosts and Goblins, you're saying that, just to make sure, if you power that on from the start, not reset like a lot of people do, just power on start, then in an ideal perfect circumstance, that game should play identically each time.
Yes and no. What I can control is the enemy spawns. Like, obviously there are also enemies that are always there and always spawn at the same time, but a lot of other spawns are random. I can control these as long as I don't spawn additional enemies. So there's parts of the stage where random enemy spawns, and there are, depending on the stage, sometimes parts where no random enemy spawns, only fixed enemies. So if I mess up in an area where random enemies spawn, that means that additional enemies will spawn, and that will throw out the whole concept of the fixed spawns, because after that, everything changes. If I mess up in an area where no random spawn happens, so I don't get additional spawns, then it doesn't impact that. But at the same time, there's other RNG, other random factors, like, for example, the Arimas, the red flying demons.
Yes.
The worst enemies of the game, they are still random. They still have random patterns that I can't influence, that I have to react to. So I can control parts of the randomness, but not all of it. There are other games where people actually manage to control everything, like, for example, Dragon Warrior on the NES, or maybe it was Dragon Warrior 2, I don't know, maybe both. They have by now speedruns that literally have you do everything frame perfect, basically, and it controls the whole game. And it is absolutely insane that people can do this and like basically control everything, but it is possible. A similar thing, for example, in RPG speedruns, where there's a so-called step route. For example, in Final Fantasy V and Final Fantasy VII has it. You always do the same steps. That way you always have the random encounters on the same spots and the same random encounters. So they are not really random encounters anymore, because you know exactly where you get what encounter. But as soon as you like take one misstep, you might mess it up and everything is ruined.
And there's also another phrase that's tossed around a lot, is the phrase global timer, where certain games work where everything is set to a certain time. And if you reach a certain point at that time, then a certain event is bound to happen, whether it be the position of an elevator you might have to jump onto, or an enemy spawn. There's another great example with the original Ninja Turtles game for the NES, where if you press start at a certain time, it will determine the position of the Technodrome, which happens like several levels later. So you have to make sure you get it on the right frame to start it, and then everything on there just exists on whatever global timer it sets, unless you throw it off somehow. And which I find fascinating that people have been able to data mine these games to the point of understanding all that. But what happens when you're in the middle of a game, you've got a great time going on, and then something happens to throw you off of your intended route. Do you find that when you're speedrunning, is it harder to accommodate for things that are no longer part of the schedule, like as opposed to playing casually?
I think it depends a lot on the game specifically. There are games where then you just start improvising and it will be fine, right? But other games, that just basically means your run is over and you have to reset. Especially when you start going for better times and try to optimize a run. The example earlier with Dragon Warrior, for example, I'm not that familiar with that run, but I'm pretty sure if you mess up in that whole chain of stuff you manipulate, then it's pretty much just over. Whereas if I mess up my spawn RNG in Ghosts and Goblins, it most likely loses me time, but I can just adjust to whatever random spawns I get from that point on and still go on.
There's a couple of spots in the Ghosts and Goblins run where you take intentional damage, which does a knockback, that pushes you into an area of the game where you shouldn't be, and you're able to use that to your advantage to either climb up the left-hand side of the screen or get past a barrier that you shouldn't be able to. For those occasions, obviously you're relying on the enemy to make contact with you. Are those encounters, are they scripted to happen? Can they possibly mess up? Or is that something that you plan for every time you're in the game, that they'll react that way?
There is randomness to it. So for these examples, the two big important damage boosts are in stage 5 and 6, where you boost up and skip part of the level. For the stage 5 one, for example, it depends just on the enemy spawns. If I'm still on my RNG spawn that I want, then I know exactly which pattern I get, so it's very, very easy. But if I lost that, I get random spawns, I have to react to that, and some spawns are kind of evil. And for the stage 6 one actually uses an Arima to damage boost, and like I said earlier, they still have random movement. You have to try to react to it. Depending on how you do it, you can cover most of the patterns you can get. Once you learn it, it's not too bad, but yeah, there's randomness to it for sure.
With Ghosts and Goblins as well, for those who don't know, one of the sticking points about the game that frustrates a lot of casual players who finally beat it is realizing that the trick to that game, and as much most of the franchise, is that you have to play the game again from the start in order to actually get the real ending of the game. What changes between the first loop and the second loop, as you call it, that you have to account for when playing it again?
In the NES G&G, it really is not that impactful. I think, for example, in the SNES game Super Ghouls, the difference is bigger. Basically, what is harder is that every enemy and every enemy projectile moves faster. So you have to definitely watch out for that. I think the difference is not that big. I always say when someone can beat the first loop, they can definitely also beat the second loop. It's not that much harder. In a speedrun, it definitely changes some strats that you can't do the same way as in the first loop, but the second loop feels quite a bit more random in that sense.
Now, speaking of things being faster in the second loop, jumping from one game to another here, let's talk about a game that's not fast at all in Castlevania the Adventure. This is another game.
It's the fastest game ever. I don't know what you're talking about.
You can't even say it without laughing, you know. This is another one that I could say I've had the privilege of beating without using save states. I've played the game start to finish and beat it. It was an adventure. I'll put it that way.
I mean, that's what the game told you, right?
It did. It's not false advertising. It's true. For those people who don't know, Castlevania the Adventure was the first Castlevania game to be put on the Game Boy. And because of the technical limitations at the time, since it was coming out at basically at the system's launch, there's a lot of things that they did that you would not be too keen on today. Like the character movement is incredibly slow to prevent screen blurring. They didn't have the memory to program in the sub-weapons, which are legendary in the Castlevania series. And then there's a lot of difficulty decisions that are put in there too. You mentioned that you had a Game Boy growing up. Was this one of the games you had as a kid?
Yes, I had this as a kid. Yes.
If you did not have this game as a kid and have memories of it from childhood, would you have honestly picked up this game later on in life and said, "Yes, I want to play this game and speedrun it"?
I don't know. It's a hard question. I mean, maybe not.
Okay, so with all the good Castlevania games out there, with Bloodstained, which is a fantastic quote-unquote Castlevania game, so to say, why speedrun Castlevania the Adventure, Laxxus? What is wrong with you, good sir? What did this game do to you?
I mean, first of all, as a kid, I never beat it. So a few years back, I also went back to the game and actually beat it because, I mean, obviously it's impossible to beat a game like that as a kid. It was originally just a joke.
Of course, yes.
Like,
it makes so much more sense now. It makes sense now. It was a joke.
Like, we made someone else play it on stream, and I was like, man, I played this game as a kid. It's a great game. I should just do a speedrun of it. And I honestly didn't put much time into it. Like, the game and the speedrun is pretty simple for the most part. So I sat down and looked at the game and practiced a little bit for a few hours, and then I just did a few runs, you know?
Is God almighty.
I mean, run is also a bit
I know
stretching it, but
oh, I'll have to put footage of the game on here so people can understand what we're talking about, because this game is terribly slow. But I have to imagine, compared to Ghosts and Goblins, does that make it easier to speedrun because this game has such a slow pace to it?
I mean, the game is definitely a lot easier than Ghosts and Goblins. Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And it being so slow, like, I mean, you have like an hour time to react to everything, right?
Yes.
You don't have to worry about a lot of tight inputs or anything. I mean, it kind of has tight inputs because a lot of jumps are very precise.
Yeah.
But then again, I mean, like, you move a pixel per second, so you still have a lot of time to make these jumps. When people play the game blind for the first time, I've watched a few by now, they go crazy with these jumps and just can't do it. Once you do them a few times, they are super simple. So it really isn't a problem. A bigger problem is that if you press your buttons too fast, it also doesn't work. And the game just eats your inputs. Something that is very normal usually in games, that you just press jump and attack at the same time. So you jump and whip. If you do that, then you jump. There's no whip. You have to delay your attack press. Otherwise, it just doesn't happen. Which makes, like, for example, turning around to hit an enemy behind you really hard. Because if you just input it too fast, then you just turn around and run into the enemy.
It seems like the secret for the jumping part, at least from my experience playing it, is that you have to kind of train yourself to realize you have to jump a little bit later than you normally think you would for any other game.
When you think you walk off, then you can jump.
Right, yes. And then the other thing to remember, too, is that for some reason, even though your horizontal pace may be a pixel per second, the vertical drop is instantaneous. Like, you will go from top to bottom of the screen in a split second. Because once Christopher Belmont starts falling, he does not stop. He goes fast.
I think that's just because of the iron boots he has.
Clearly.
They make him walk slowly, and obviously they make him fall fast. That's basically, I think Ocarina of Time stole that from Adventure.
If that's one thing that Shigeru Miyamoto did not confess to, it's that he was inspired largely by Castlevania the Adventure, his favorite game growing up.
Yeah, that must be the reason.
For me, at least, when I was playing it, level 1, okay, there's some tricky jumps that got that. Level 2, a bit more complicated, but still not bad. And then there's level 3. How do you feel, because this is one of those things where, for people who also don't know about speedrunning, a lot of level 3 has kind of what we would call an auto-scroller kind of a feel to it. even though there's a lot more dynamics in terms of the directions that you're going with it. How do you approach something like level 3 where you have this constant sense of pressure from things coming at you, those tight jumps? Is that the hardest level in the game, and how do you feel about it?
It is actually the easiest level in the speedrun.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
It is. This whole level is, once again, I saw a few people play this blind, and level 3 is where they all get stuck and they question their sanity. But level 3, once you know the level, it is pretty simple. But to get to the auto-scroller thing, in general, auto-scrollers obviously are definitely not what speedrunners want to see, because it's pretty boring usually and there's nothing you can do. But for this game, well, the game lags a lot. It's not only slow, it gets even slower with a lot of lag. A lot of going fast in that game is trying to reduce lag, and there's quite a bit of lag reduction you can do in these auto-scrollers. For example, you have this vertical auto-scroller where you have to climb up ropes all the time and have to avoid a lot of spikes and stuff. If you hang on a rope without moving, the game lags less and the screen moves faster up. That's stuff you can do in that auto-scroller to speed it up. In that sense, interesting, because it's not just a simple auto-scroller where nothing happens. You can actively gain or lose time.
So what then would you say is the hardest part of that speed run? And if I had to guess from my own experience, is it learning when to jump and whip on Dracula's final form?
Man, that fight is kind of awful. But it's also, with a little bit of practice, not that hard. The challenge of that run is simply to not get hit. Because the problem is, unlike every other Castlevania game, you lose your whip upgrades on every hit you take. So you start with a leather whip, you can upgrade to a chain whip and then to a flame whip that shoots a fireball as well. And every time, on every single hit, you lose one whip upgrade. Obviously, losing whip upgrades means you deal less damage, means you go slower. So optimally, you want to beat the whole game without getting hit a single time. There are a few backup whip upgrades on the way that you can get without losing too much time. Yeah, that is definitely the challenge of that run.
I can see why. I know that for Castlevania 4, when I've watched speedruns of that, a person's trying to go through just start to finish. The thing that kills them, or I should say kills the run, is if they die, you lose your upgrade, and the biggest upgrade you can possibly work with in Castlevania 4 is getting the triple cross. Having that to be able to decimate everything. And if you lose that, good lord, your time is going to sink like a stone.
Or another example would be Castlevania 1 with the holy water that you want basically everywhere. If you lose that, then you're going to have a hard time with some bosses especially.
Oh yeah, I'll be honest. I do not know how to beat Frankenstein and Igor without the holy water. Without that, really? It's just like, I can't do it. I can't do it at all.
I don't think that one is that hard. I think Death is a lot harder. But yeah, those two bosses are definitely very challenging if you lose your holy water. And Frankenstein has the fun part with the Fleaman Alley right before him. So they like to drop an axe on you.
Yep, I'm actually good about that part. I'm surprisingly quick at that area and fine, and I know to pause a little bit to make sure not to get the axe. And the death fight, I'm not too bad at. I don't like how the little scythes that he throws seem to randomly pop up in certain places. That kind of pisses me off. But really, it's the hallway leading up to him with the axe armors and the Medusa heads. It's like, okay, this is not fun. Somebody who did this, they're an angry person.
That hallway is especially rough because when you get the cross that is right before that, those knights block the cross. You can not use it very effectively. Oh yeah, that hallway is...
It gets me every time, the hallway to hell. But everything else, I mean, even Dracula as a fight. Like when you talk about learning a pattern and practicing, Dracula fight is incredibly simple if you just recognize that pattern. You just know when to jump over the fireballs at the right time so they go under you during your jump. You keep moving so he doesn't spawn on you. Hit the head, throw the cross, and then once he gets to the second form, if you can grab the holy water on the left side of the screen and use that, you can lock him in place, whip him to death. It's not bad.
Yeah, it's that simple. And that Dracula fight, by the way, is also another example of fixed patterns. If you lose no frame in that final room until you spawn Dracula, so you never let go of left, then you know exactly where he spawns. That's what the speedrun uses to make the fight a lot more consistent.
Those clever bastards.
Yeah, they know exactly where he spawns. Like, not only the first 2 spawns, but basically all spawns depending on your position, and that makes the fight a lot easier.
And now, speaking of other games, since we've veered from the ones that you've really just shown an incredible degree of skill at in terms of getting, world records. You're currently running Rockman 2, otherwise known as Mega Man 2, outside of Japan. What was your familiarity with the Mega Man series before speedrunning Mega Man 2? Fun
fact, Mega Man 2 was the first game I ever tried to speedrun.
Ooh.
Back in 2013, 14, whatever. I played it on my 3DS Virtual Console.
Oh my gosh, that's a quick way to cramp your hands. Like, did you just have like these claw grips for like days afterwards?
Yes. Playing for a longer time on that was pretty rough. Surprisingly, my attempts back then were not that great, but it was still fun. Like, for years I did some speedrunning on and off, just a little bit, without like ever doing it seriously, without ever recording anything, just for myself to just have fun with it. And yeah, Mega Man 2 was the first game I ever tried speedrunning, so that was part of the reason why I wanted to return to it eventually to properly run it.
And you told me at one point in time when I was talking about Mega Man 2 and my love of the game. Mega Man's one of my favorite gaming franchises, if not my... it might be... It's in my top 3 of all time. And I can do Mega Man 2 deathless. I don't do any of the tricks and strategies that speedrunners do because I'm not concerned so much about the time. And one of the things I said to you was that I couldn't imagine myself going for time because I know I'd never be as good as the people who hold the records. And you told me that the way to think about it is not to go into it hoping that you could be better than somebody else, but just look at it from the perspective of trying to do better than what you did before. And that really, struck a chord in terms of thinking about it from that perspective. How much better do you feel that you've become at the game? And what would be your personal goal? Like, where would you like to see yourself be in terms of speedrunning that game?
Oh, I definitely got a lot better at it. To emphasize on what you said a bit more, I think speedrunning is in general a way to challenge yourself, to set yourself goals that you want to reach. Sure, you can use times of other people. You could use the leaderboards for like things you want to accomplish, but what a lot of people are too focused on seeing, oh my god, these top runs, I can never compete with that. That does not matter at all. Just get your own goals and have fun with the game. That's what speedrunning is about. And if it turns out that it works better than you expected, well then, and is more fun than you expected, then keep going and improve, and maybe you can even reach the better times. But if not, well, as long as you have fun, it's great.
What's your personal goal for Mega Man 2 or Rock Band 2?
Yeah, for now it's a sub 28-minute run. That's a decent goal for me. So I play Rockman 2 with the zips, so with all the glitches and stuff. So it's a little bit faster. And the world record for that is currently 26:37, I think. These runs are just pretty insane.
Every time I'm watching one of the streams, I'm used to it by now from watching GDQ events and everything else, but it never fails. I think every time you do a stream, there's always one person who, when you get to Woodman stage, will ask what the fuck is going on when when they see you doing the screen scroll glitch. And that's so much fun to watch because for those who don't know what it is, and hopefully I'll put some footage of it up here at some point in time too, but basically you are tricking the game into thinking that you are on a different screen than what it is displaying. And then eventually, upon taking a death, the game resets itself to be on the screen that it now thinks that you are at based off the actions you performed.
Yeah. So basically, it is used a few times in the run. You get inside the wall, and that way the game basically forces you. If you do it right, if you face left while inside of a wall, the game just zips you to the right to force you out or something. I don't know. And that way you can screen scroll. So you every time you go out of the right side of the screen and reappear on the left side, you went one room further in the game. There's just a room counter that just goes up by one. The game displays still the old screen, so it confuses between the screen it shows you and the screen you're actually on. If you know what you're doing, maneuver your way through this out of bounds stuff until you reach a certain screen. In Woodman stage, it is the screen before the boss corridor, and then you take a death, and that respawns you right at the boss door because you reached the checkpoint. There's a similar one in the Crashman stage where you then respawn at the checkpoint of the stage. And there's similar stuff, for example, in Quickman stage where you don't have to take a death, but you find ways to get back inbounds to the right screen again. It is pretty funky stuff, but it's also stuff that I really like about speedruns. These glitches always fascinate me.
So other games that I've seen you run, and people can watch you run on your Twitch channel, you've played through Kid Icarus, Ninja Gaiden, Panic Restaurant. What are some other games that you either would like to speedrun that you haven't yet, or ones that you've speedrun periodically, but you've kind of put aside that eventually you'll get back to?
The biggest one to mention for me is always Bloodstained Curse of the Moon. That was for years basically my main speed game, and was the game that actually got me to AGDQ 2 years ago. That is still my favorite speedrun, and I will always return to it at some point.
Aww.
Still have more plans to improve sometimes for it. Apart from that, there's so many games that would be interesting to learn and to speedrun. It's a major time investment for some games at least. So one game I would like to learn eventually is Castlevania 4, which is definitely a hard one and would take quite a long time to learn. So I try to put it off.
Well, fortunately, we have a mutual friend who's fairly talented at that game, I guess we could say.
Yeah, true. I want to return one day to the first Mega Man Game Boy game, Dr. Wily's Revenge.
Yes.
That was speedrun that for like a week or so before I even started streaming. There was also a game that I had in my childhood, so fond childhood memories. Was the first Mega Man game I played in my childhood, so it is something special for me. So I want to relearn that run at some point. I don't know, there's a ton of games that I would like to learn.
Well, when you're playing casually, what do you find yourself playing casually?
Casually, I like to play a lot of RPGs.
Ooh.
That's usually my favorite genre.
Do you have any certain standout RPGs that you enjoy?
And there's a lot of good RPGs.
It's my go-to genre as well, so I'm always interested in what other people love.
I mean, I said at the beginning already with my favorite RPG being Betrayal at Krondor, but I wouldn't recommend that to everyone because, like I said, it's hard to get into. Other RPGs, I really like Dragon Age Origins. Mm-hmm. It's a fantastic game. Grandia 2, amazing RPG.
That's a good pick. That's a very good pick.
I mean, Final Fantasy series obviously has a lot of great games. I don't want to get the discussion going, which is the best Final Fantasy now. But I really enjoy a lot of those games. What else is there? Terranigma is another great game. That's one of these games that Europe got, but North America didn't get back in the day.
One of the rare ones, which was supposed to be part of the Quintet trilogy, as people refer to it, that included Soul Blazer, Illusion of Gaia, though it went by another name in Europe. It wasn't called Illusion of Gaia for you guys, was it? Illusion of Time. That thing.
For whatever reason. I don't know. It's weird.
Yeah, and then Terra Enigma, which may be, in terms of the depth and complexity and all the mechanics of that, maybe one of the more complex and unique games on the Super Nintendo. And we just, for some reason, never got it over here, largely because I guess the localization team didn't want to take a chance on publishing it. It's weird, but...
Yeah, from what I read, they closed their office in America before the game was released there, so it got canceled there. But the office in Europe still remained open, so it got released over here. I don't know. It's kind of weird.
It is, but it's a fantastic game. I remember discovering a ROM of it back when I was in college and playing. It's like, wow, how did we never get this game?
Yeah, it's a really good one. The whole trilogy is really good. Even though, I mean, it is a very loose trilogy. They are not really connected.
Right.
I mean, they share some similarities, but overall, they are not connected. But all three of them are pretty good.
Even then, you could even argue that Soul Blazer almost has more in common with ActRaiser than anything. It even has the same goddamn life bar.
I mean, yeah. Back then, a lot of companies reused their sprites and their sounds in all kinds of games. You can hear it with all kinds of games where you just suddenly you're like, man, didn't I hear that sound effect in this or that game? Yeah, they just reused the stuff all the time.
Yeah, but the little connections like that can sometimes be fun too when it's kind of a little throwback. There's little touches, like in Super Mario RPG, which I think Europe never got until it got like a Virtual Console release, I think.
True.
There's a battle against a secret boss named Kulix, and when you go to fight him, he's obviously not modeled after any kind of a Mario character. So when you fight him, they play the battle theme from Final Fantasy IV, and it's just cool having that like very Final Fantasy boss battle theme going. It's like, yeah, that's a nice little throwback there.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, that was my introduction to that song, since I played Mario RPG way before I played Final Fantasy IV, and it's a nice little touch that actually it might be my favorite Final Fantasy boss theme in the entire franchise.
Just because of Super Mario RPG.
Well, it's got this catchy little, like, it's got a great bass line, the doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo, and then you've got the nice little drum breaks at the end where it's got that like the doot 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 doot, and it leads back into the melody. The music composition back then, I love what they did, because they had to do as much as they could with as little as possible, since because of memory limitations, musical like limited sound patterns and types that they could use. So watching that ingenuity come together, it makes for some amazing music that I think people take for granted today, because they have, more memory, full orchestras. They don't have to go by whatever the sound chip could offer. It's really fantastic.
Oh yeah, especially what they did on the NES back then, which was really so limited. But some of these soundtracks are insanely good. I mean, what they did with those limitations is incredible.
Oh yeah.
I mean, not all games. There's also some other ones.
One of my favorites from the NES era, from a game that you speedrun, Ninja Gaiden, there's the theme Unbreakable Determination, which I think
4-2.
4-2, and also the ending theme. So nice, yeah. They used it twice.
Yeah, for the few people that get to the end.
Yes. But it's a great song, and it just goes to show the ingenuity that they had to use, and even all of Castlevania 2, for as much as that game gets criticized, it has an amazing soundtrack to it.
A lot of amazing soundtracks. I always recommend the soundtrack of Journey to Silius on the NES.
That's a good
that is a game that is not maybe not the most popular, but that soundtrack is so good.
It really is. You're 100% right. I can never remember the name of the composer for Sunsoft, and I hate that I can never remember his name, because every Sunsoft game, and I think this is one of the few things that you could ever say about a video game company, but you could tell just from the sound, from like a couple of notes, you could tell if it was a Sunsoft soundtrack, because they had a very distinct sound to it that you could hear in Batman NES, Blaster Master, Gremlins 2, Journey to Silius. Like, you can tell from the drum sounds and the way that it's arranged, you could tell it was a Sunsoft game.
Yeah, true.
You can't really say that for other things. Like, you might hear a song, it's like, well, maybe that was from a Mega Man game. But that Sunsoft ones, you could tell, and you're right. The Journey to Silius is just completely overlooked, but that soundtrack is a banger. And to wrap things up here, if you had to pick one game, watch a speedrun of, to like really showcase what speedrunning is and how interesting it could be, what would be that one game? And then outside of the world of speedrunning, name one game that you think is completely overlooked that people should pay more attention to.
Oh, now you come with the hard questions here.
Always end with a good one.
A run that people should watch to get impressed by speedrunning, I guess.
Yeah.
Super Metroid.
Oh, that is a good pick.
Super Metroid on a high level is an incredible run, and also very, very hard. The amount of strats and tricks used there is insane without using too many glitches. It is really, really impressive. There's a lot of great and impressive speedruns. Now I've seen so many speedruns, but like back when I got into this, it was really really interesting to just look up speedruns of games that I'm very familiar with, that I like a lot, and then just to look at what people did with it, and it is sometimes really, really mind-blowing.
It is, and Super Metroid is a great example of that too, because like what you said of like all the tricks, and some of them a person can replicate with practice. Like if I wanted to go and do the mock ball,
I mean, in theory, you can recreate everything, right?
Yeah, but it's one of those things where I can reliably create those or recreate those a lot of those tricks, but to string them together constantly in a speed run with precision and limited flaws, that's a completely different thing. Like you can test doing the mock ball jump in that area of Brinstar. You can just do it all the time and practice it. But to do it while you're actually playing through the game, that's another question.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And what game would you say just doesn't get enough attention, and even outside the world of speedrunning, that you would say to people, you need to show this game some more love?
Whew, that's a very, very hard question.
Is there a JRPG that you think is like criminally overlooked, or just a classic retro game that you've picked up that's like, yeah, this is a good game, I don't know why everybody else doesn't like it?
I mean, there's a lot of games on the NES, for example, that too few people know, unless they are really already actively in the retro speedrunning community, like Journey to Silius, like Panic Restaurant. Just remembering some of the names now. See, they are so unknown that I can't even remember the names now. Bucky O'Hare is another one. Ooh, that I think a lot of people don't really know about, but it's just a fantastic NES game, fantastic soundtrack as well. Gremlins 2 is another one. I think a lot of these games deserve more love, because like everyone knows these like Mega Mans and Mario and all these very popular games, but there's a lot of hidden gems on the NES. Definitely deserve some more love.
I thank you for taking the time out to speak with me about speedrunning, and particularly the runs that you've achieved some world records on, which you think they're going to stand. How's the competition looking, Laxxus?
I mean, my CV Adventure run will probably get beaten soon. I know, we'll see. I hope someone works on getting close to my Ghosts and Goblins run. I would like to see that. Like I said earlier, it's not that important to have like world records or these top spots. It's just nice to see your own progression and also see the progression of the game in general. Like if you can implement new strats that help everyone to go faster and stuff like that, and then see other people improve and try to beat your time or something like that. That's always great to see.
It's like there's competition between people, but the real enemy is time itself.
Yeah, like it is in some sense obviously competition, but at least in most speedrunning communities, people work together to bring the time down. Like that is the most important thing. It's not to be the one on top. It is to bring the speedrun down, to improve the speedrun as a community. And that is, I think, a very, very good factor, and makes a lot of these communities very enjoyable.
Well, for speaking of those communities where people can watch you, you're on Twitch, just under twitch.tv/Laxxus, which I'll have a link to. And you do upload clips to YouTube as well, so if people want to go back and watch those, they can see them on your YouTube channel.
All my great PBs.
Well, there are a lot of great PBs to watch, and there's a lot of great video in general to look at. You even have a Ghosts and Goblins tutorial where you talk about the second loop.
That is true.
Yeah, that's a detailed video. I think it's over like 2 hours long, where you really break it down for people too.
I think it's almost 4 hours.
Oh,
is
my
it
goodness.
almost 3 or almost 4? I don't know. Almost 3, I think. I think it's almost 3. But that is still pretty long for a run that is optimally like 18 minutes.
But at least you've got that there for people who are interested to watch. And thank you again for taking the time out to talk with me.
No problem. It was fun for me as well.
Thank you. So for all of you watching, please check out Laxxus' channel on Twitch and on YouTube. Speedrunning is one of those things that once you start going down that rabbit hole, you're going to find things that you enjoy in terms of just really being just entertained and amazed by what some people will do. And then the community aspect behind it and how they rally behind the games and working with each other, finding those new strategies, as Laxxus was talking about, and the charity events that take place too, where millions of dollars have been raised between events like Games Done Quick, the European Speedrunners. There's so many great people involved in this community who care not just about gaming, but about people. And there's a great sense of warmth when you see that generosity and kindness spread. So there's a lot to enjoy with that. And I hope this gave those of you who are listening some insight into some of the elements of that. So for myself and Laxxus, to all of you listening, thank you very much, as I wish you all a good day and pleasant dreams of Electric Sheep.